Hello and welcome to the show. On today's podcast, we're trying something new with me doing double duty, acting as guest host for the OIS podcast, along with my role as host of the Eye Opener podcast by my firm, Excite Ventures. I'm thrilled to be here today with David Esposito and Connie Chang from ONL Therapeutics. ONL Therapeutics is an Ann Arbor-based company developing therapeutics to protect the vision of patients with retinal disease. ONL is also an Excite Ventures portfolio company, so I've had a front row seat to the company's development and growth over the last some odd years. Today we'll be discussing teamwork in the C-suite, the critical relationship of the CEO and COO. In my opinion, this is one of, if not the most important factors in the success of any company. This relationship sets the tone for a high-functioning team, and Connie and David are two of the best in the business and a model for how this critical relationship supports and drives the company forward. Connie and David have been working together for over 5 years now and have plenty of lessons learned that I think we all collectively hope that others can learn from today's conversation. David and Connie, maybe a couple minutes just introducing yourselves. Connie, why don't you start off, and then David.
Thanks so much, James, for having us today. It's really great to be here. I'm Connie Chang. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of ONL Therapeutics. A little bit about my background. I have really 3 different phases of what I've done. Obviously, I'm now in small venture-backed biotech, although ONL is not so small as it was 5 years ago. But I also have a background in big pharma, and I've worked at Pfizer and what was formerly Cephacor, mostly on the commercial side. And then I also did a stint within the academic environment of innovation. So I worked at the University of Michigan, helping faculty members think about commercialization and industry partnerships for their research. So the whole gamut, A to Z. And I think the idea of having the CEO, COO interaction being the piece today is really a great idea, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been I've been in healthcare a little bit over 30 years. Starting off my career as a sales rep for Merck, selling Timolol. I think most of your audience may remember how still the rapid Timolol for IOP lowering glaucoma. And similar to Connie, spent a fairly sizable chunk of my career in large pharma, spent about 15 years or so at Merck. And then made a big change in my career and moved into more early and mid-stage for the last half of my career. Moved to Michigan and started a diagnostics business that eventually had an exit, and then started a cancer diagnostics business as well. That's how I eventually came to ONL. That business was sold to a large diagnostics player, and some investors in that company had invested in ONL, and then 5-6 years or so ago, when ONL was looking for a leadership change, joined the company. So I'm a big pharma person to roots, and then mostly your early mid-stage biotech since that. And excited to be here to talk about the relationship. As Connie said, we think it's a core part of our team and how we function.
Appreciate you both being here. Again, I think you two are two of the best in the business, and ONL has just been the paradigm by which we judge and measure all other companies. So really looking forward to no pressure at all. You both bring varied experiences to the table that I think, have informed probably how you show up at ONL and bring those experiences to the table and inform your leadership style at ONL. So an effective teamwork is a critical ingredient of driving successful outcomes for any early stage company, really any company, but I think it's more magnified at the early stage. With the relationship between any C-suite members being critical. We at Excite have seen companies falter because those relationships fraying. So since that relationship is so important, can you both describe some key qualities of your relationship and what you think is needed to be effective teammates in building a company? I see the big house in the background there. That's an example of effective teamwork. So David, maybe you kick off and then Connie can follow up. What are some of these traits that are critical?
Yeah, I think there's a host of them, and a lot of people have written a number of good books about it, but I think it does come down to some of the basics of being very open and trustworthy together as a team. The ability to just put the issues on the table, talk about them in a very open way, and then know at the end of the day, each partner is throw in their best effort from the information they have in a trustworthy way over time. I think I'd say those are really two fundamental things that I think Connie and I really work hard to do, is just being real open with what's there and trust that we're putting the right intent forward to get there. I think that's been a real foundational part of our success. So Connie, maybe.
Yeah, it also, you're going to look under the hood today, James, and thanks for all the compliments. But, the truth of it is that David and I built a level of candor with each other. And so the fact that we work well together doesn't mean we always agree on everything. And I think learning how to sort through disagreement or sort through debates is also a really important attribute of leadership style. And I think everything flows downhill and outwards, right? So if the team can see that sometimes we can, work through differences, then it becomes part of the culture.
Yeah, I might just add one pile into that, just on the human side of the things we've said. I think to what Connie described, in that whether there's disagreements, and James, you've been a part of the journey of the company for even predates me with regards to your investment, is that, this is hard work, right? There's the occasional gut punches. And I think the level of, I'd say, vulnerability and genuineness that's in our relationship, where we can close the door and say, you know what, I'm feeling this is really rough. We got to solve this problem. Here's kind of where I'm at mentally, physically, emotionally on this problem. To have that level of vulnerability, to know that each other can lean on each other to pull through, I think is a huge thing that I would say for us has grown over the years, and it's one of those things that if it doesn't start with some of those pillars of wanting to be trustworthy and all that, you can't get there. But this stuff is hard, and you need a good companion in the journey to realize you can kind of be very real at times, where you just, need either to got some encouragement to keep going, or sometimes, a kick in the pants to get rolling. And we had that relationship that way.
And it sounds like you got some stories there on the kick in the pants.
I don't know what ones are going to come out, but yeah, we might have a few.
We might have some.
Yeah. So transparency, trustworthiness, I think, vulnerability may build that trustworthiness, right? And then candor. Connie, you mentioned the team seeing this and it flowing outwards from kind of the leadership team. How do you, I think some leadership teams try to keep closed off, right? And not show that vulnerability and communicate all of the challenges to the team. How do you guys work to be more open with the team to create that trustworthy and transparent environment?
One thing that we've done consistently since I started that I think is a unique and positive aspect of the ONL culture is no matter how busy we are or how strapped we are for time or other resources, we take time to have periodic check-ins. We do town halls from a virtual perspective, but we also do in-person what we call all hands meetings. It's a really easy thing to not do if you're a smaller biotech, if you've got a lot of time pressures, you've got a lot of goals that you need to achieve. But one thing to compliment David's leadership style is no matter what, we take time to pull the team together. For a lot of people who are probably listening, there's, hybrid models of work are rampant, and we'll do exceptions. So we have people in the office here with us every day in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we have people working as far away as California, New Jersey, and everywhere in between. And so being really deliberate about taking time to keep the team informed is important. And the other thing that I'll say is, what was a little bit different for me coming into the ONL culture was this real openness. Let's share as much as we can with the team. Let's get everybody on board so that there isn't like what you were saying, there's what the C-suite knows, and then there's sort of like drips and drabs of what the rest of the organization knows. Of course, we have to be sensitive to how we roll out that communication and the level of detail. But I think to a person, people are generally understanding of where the company is at a time.
Yeah, maybe just pile on to that. I think, it does start with I think the fundamentals of making a plan, right? An investment thesis to secure your investment, James, and what do we want to do with that capital? And so, Connie's been a really great partner to kind of lead that charge. This is how we articulate the plan. This is how we lay it out, how we communicate that. All is really important to go as far as we can in transparency for the team knows where we are. But I'll tell you, we don't, always get it right. I think there are some things that maybe, obviously, personnel matters, stay really close to certain teams. But, we ran with your oversight in the team, several phase 1 studies. You're looking at patient data rolling in on a daily basis. I can think too, I may have shotgunned a little bit of patient update, maybe a little too far, too fast sometimes. And Connie and others on the team was pretty good saying, we probably should have chewed on that one a little bit longer before you let the whole world know about it. I think, so I think our relationship, but collectively it's a team, like we probably want to err on the side of getting the word out as opposed to being so closed off. But in the aspect of doing that, I know myself a few times where I probably put that one out there a little bit too fast, and you got to recalibrate. But again, I'd rather err on that side than perhaps be it too closed off. And I think the team, thank goodness, has been a little bit graceful in forgetting when you go a little too fast too far.
Well, it's much harder in biopharma and life sciences than it is in the tech ecosystem, right? To move fast and break things. We don't want to do that, but you still have to move fast. And I think communication erring on the side of caution, you've benefited from kind of taking that ethos on. And certainly as investors, we appreciate your monthly updates. We try to encourage all of our companies to do that just as a method of communication. That way we're kind of kept not in the dark, in the light, and it allows you to kind of hopefully act without any interference from the investors, right? We're here if you need us, but when we don't hear from companies for long periods of time, we start to worry and then ask questions and what's going on. With ONL, you provide monthly updates, and that's been really great. On a tactical side, innovation is hard. This stuff, there's always challenges that come up. You've alluded to some of them. How often are you checking in on your plan that you mentioned, right? Are we tracking to plan? Is there a daily update? Is that weekly? Is it monthly? And how often are you working together on, dealing with some of those challenges as they come? Because, little problems can become big problems. Obviously, big problems come up right away and, it's easy to focus on those. But the little problems tend to percolate in the background. So how do you guys communicate around that and check in? Just as a tactical advice for others out there.
What do you think?
And I'll go from there.
I'll let you take it worse.
I think that the cadence, and we at least as a team, I think have learned to adjust the cadence on those as either the team has gotten bigger or the projects have gotten longer winded. But from a real practical standpoint, we still are strict about weekly one-on-ones. We cover the game plan. So whether it's Connie and I, other members of the leadership team, one-on-ones with their teams, that cadence is there. We have a weekly leadership team, what we call our executive leadership team, which is the C-suite. And that's a pretty consistent drumbeat around what's going on. And I will say with, Connie's guidance and the input of the team over time, we had weekly large team meetings to have an open update. And as the teams got bigger and leaders came in and play, we now go to more a monthly kind of operating plan meeting that catches probably the next level down of details. But that's pretty practical. And I'll just kind of highlight one other time. We still have the hallway conversations, that something came in from an investor or something like, hey, let's address it. And I think that practical, very tactical cadence is what we hear too. I don't know what you add.
I would just add one thing, and that's we have, I would say, 1 or 2 killer corporate operational slides. And we use those all the time. They do get updated all the time. So one of them is a pretty simple looking PowerPoint Gantt chart. And it basically puts into pictures what we talk about, this is our runway. Here's our major milestones that we need to meet. And the we use that as a communication tool and a visualization tool. It seems really simple. It's not always easy to have the discipline to pull that out every time and use it at the beginning of these meetings that David mentioned. But it's something that we do very, very consistently. I mean, I think that's where David and I started out saying, where our backgrounds come from. And we both come from a big pharma background where consistent communication, because you've got 100,000 people that are all out there in the field. How do you make sure that they're all saying the same thing about products? You kind of get drilled in this consistent communication. I think it works whether you're 60,000 employees or whether you're 16 employees. It really helps to have that kind of tool.
I'm being just worthy, James, piling a little bit on that one, that, at the end of the day, we're all been around long enough leading teams. Despite having a great meeting and articulating things, the stats would show 7 out of 10 really didn't know what was going on in the meeting, we're just methodically consistent on putting those slides out, talking about the deliverables, talking about the next level down, to the point where I really hope people are sitting in chairs or on webcast. Oh boy, that's Esposito saying the same thing, has Connie saying the same. I heard that last week, because that would be great, because communication is heavy labor and work. And it's a fine balance, to your point on the monthly things. Like and Connie and I run those together, those notes, like she's always good about saying, you're putting too much into this thing, nobody's going to read it. And so then we trim it down. And there's a constant battle of, you don't want to over communicate, you put too much, nobody does read it. What's the right rhythm? I'd say we kind of learned over time and then adjust a little bit, the amount you put together, but there's no getting away the principle, just consistent, methodical communications to keep people rolling.
Consistent, methodical, deliberate. A lot of the themes that kind of keep coming out, just to be consistent and communicate, even if it's overly so, right? Just the routine and get that across. So we touched on a lot of the themes, and also, one of the things that you just touched on that we'll get to at the end, I want to make sure we do. So I want to just earmark that as scaling and the importance of how you have to evolve as you scale. But before we get into that, let's just dig deeper into some of the themes you touched on. Can you share some specifics, good, bad, ugly, on your experiences around trust? We'll start there, and then I'll get into some of the others. So let's start with some of the good, bad, and ugly around trust.
Yeah. Trust. So, we could get a little philosophical here, but I think trust is created in small moments as well as large. So sure, we run a biotech, so we've got highs, we've got extreme lows in terms of the business and the operations. But I think one thing that we try to do too is to, be human, have movements of levity. And, one of the things I think builds trust is being able to laugh at each other or laugh at oneself. And so one of the jokes that we have around the office is that David's always going to say yes, and maybe Connie says no more. I don't think I'm always a no, but, and so we actually, one Halloween, if I can share this story, David dressed up like a physician, but he was Dr. Yes, as opposed to, Dr. No. And I think that there's a little bit of truth in that. There's a little bit of recognition that, sometimes you're a CEO of a biotech. You have to be unwaveringly optimistic. You have to always look at the bright side. Yeah, that's your role as the CEO. My role, I feel, as a COO, and it's part of my personality, is, okay, that sounds great. How are you going to make it happen? Where's the money to make that happen? Where are the people that are going to make that happen? So there's a little bit of being sometimes a wet blanket, but being a realist and making sure that the execution is really, really tight, because that's where the rubber meets the road. So, it's a roundabout way of answering your question. I think trust needs to be built in many different corridors, and sometimes it's it's humor, being human.
I'll answer that example. So not the Dr. Yes can like it. Yeah, that is very true for sure.
No, everybody just knows that.
But hey, and James, you and the team have helped us journey through this. I'd say, in most of your audience probably resonates. When you're going first in human, first couple deposits, first patients, like there's a lot of assessment of what's going on with that patient. You hope everything's smooth with no problems, but inevitably you see some things that makes you wonder, whoa, what is really going on in there? And I think the level of trust that we have broadly as a team, because there's a preclinical perspective that's brought to the table. Hey, we saw these things in a rabbit model, a mini pig model, and then here's where we are in humans. What could be going on? I think I'd say those are the finer moments where varying points of views come to the table, but the common bond of what's in the best interest of patients, safety first, how you assess those things, that trustworthy moments like build really strength over time, because this is complicated science. All the easy kind of problems have been figured out, and you need to put it on the table and really embrace different points of view, knowing that everybody's intent is aligned in the same way. But I can tell you, we've had, tough conversations around specifically those kind of things. What are we seeing in that patient? We know what the doc said in the site. What do we know preclinically? Or could it be this? Could it be that? And sometimes that's a little bit of sausage making in the beginning to figure out where it is, but it is the trust of the team and ultimately the direction we want to go that lands in a good spot. But I would say that's where, the textbooks say you can write trust faster. I just feel like you build it long over time with those kind of discussions with a team that is human enough to say, boy, I had this really firm opinion. I kind of see now the light of day. I don't hold to it anymore. That builds trust as well. And those are, without getting too detailed into those specific, that's kind of where I think we've built it a bit.
That's good. I like that story, the doctor yes and doctor no, but I think it illustrates a key component of innovation, right? Innovators tend to, and leaders need to kind of be optimistic and think forward and think big ideas. But at the same time, you need to execute on those ideas and have the resources to do so. So Connie, that's such an important role. And, for any listeners out there, we've seen so many companies that kind of had promising, really early stage stuff, promising founders with great big ideas, and they just don't have the focus. So I think, the relationship and building the trust around, hey, we want to make this big picture idea happen, but we need to hone in on what's going to get us there. Because so often we kind of see teams scattershot. We'll go do this idea and that idea. So it really is, driving towards the same goal and focusing on one thing at some point. So I think, you bringing up those stories really illustrates kind of that tension when you're innovating. You said wet blanket. I wouldn't use that. I'm sure you can feel that way at times, right?
Very realistic perspective. She breaks it.
Yeah, you go. Have to link in reality. Exactly.
But let's say, James, maybe one point, because you touched on trust and example. I was using a little bit on the A stuff. I would say, with companies and I experience too, and there's been people on the team as well that at times, sometimes to your point, we get a proposal to go in a different direction or conduct some kind of experiment or align with a CRO in a particular project. And it either gets mismanaged, the time gets fouled up, or the budget's way out of whack. And we've had, those kind of conversations to say, boy, the next time this individual's putting a proposal together, we're going to kick the tires a little bit harder because everyone they put forward seems to come off the rails from a cost or time standpoint. So those things do cause some emotional labor and trust issues when you have maybe some repeat offenders on some of those practical things. And everybody stubs their toe and so on. But we're certainly good at calling people on it to say, you're going to get a little bit more oversight because perhaps you've kind of fallen short in some of those basic expectations.
Yeah, I think that's always a risk, right? And how do you build that trust and work to kind of bring up those parties that may not be delivering on their promises versus, when you just kind of terminate those relationships. You mentioned CROs, and I think there's only so much you can control in-house, and then you have to rely on external partners at some point for this stage of innovation, right? So how do you, and I think that kind of builds on the next topic or theme, right? And aligning around strategies and the tactics to execute on those strategies, whether it's working with a CRO or external partner or internally, right? So how do you build that alignment? You talked a bit about it, but, dig in on the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and drag Connie into one example. I'm sure she may have a couple others, but I was just going to say, so in real practical times, you can post those for all, we had a little bit of struggles in scaling up CMC the last, 6 months or so. And, we, to the point on how we build trust and alignment, I'd tell you, as a leadership team, you look around the table and figure out, all right, we got to solve this problem. I would say for a variety of different reasons I won't go into totally, but Connie steps up and goes like, I'm in. I see we got a problem. I'm going to step in. She spent a week. It was supposed to be a day trip, spent inevitably a week with a partner of ours to get a product built, and then did it again a handful of months later when we had a redo. So I use that to say our roles or role of the C-suite, like we leave our rank, our titles at the door and try to solve problems. And Connie's setting that kind of example and embodying that in just this most recent example, just saying, boy, we got a major issue. There's a lot going on in the team and other priorities. I'm going in. So you pack a light bag. Next thing you know, she's shopping for stuff to stay there a week to get it all done. And that's the kind of, and that is what builds the alignment of teamwork, the alignment of trust, the alignment of, hey, we're all in this together, that I think is really solidifying over time. And that's just one of many examples that I could tell for Connie on how to drive that alignment.
Well, that's very kind of you. Maybe there's a little hyperbole in there, but I think
this wasn't chickens.
Yeah. No, so here's the thing. A manager of mine from many, many years ago once said, if you see a fire, I want to see what people have been run to the fire. And I think that kind of gets to your question earlier, James, of challenges to scaling an organization. When you're only 10 people and you bring on 2 more people, that's a big change. It's a 20% increase. That's a lot of different voices around the table. And so one of the things that we've tried to do, and sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, is can we find the people who are going to run to the fire? Can we find the people who, despite having a certain title, will truly roll up their sleeves and build a work plan or get into the Excel spreadsheet and just make it happen? I think for companies of our size and the audience of, who we're talking to today, startup companies, it's sometimes hard to find that blend of people who like to think about the big picture and can think about the big picture, but don't mind getting into the weeds when you have to. When it's just, that's a hard thing.
Yeah. No, I think we've haven't always got it right in ONL, and I could speak of prior experiences too. It's probably the toughest type of hire in a company of ours where we still need most people to show up to be useful and do work, regardless of your title and size. And, sometimes it is difficult when you're bringing in some of these senior roles to make sure that happens. It's a tough balance, and I think that's where you got to really work at that. And I think collectively as a team, we haven't got it always right, but it's one that's it's tough.
It is one of the biggest challenges we see, particularly when you're trying to hire in new talent. And you both, I appreciate your perspective here. You both come from, have big organization backgrounds, but we have seen it, from across our portfolio and in other places be a big challenge to bring in people from large organizations that think they're above rolling up their sleeves, right? That's for somebody else to do, not me. And so, how do you, in a practical matter, when you're hiring, kind of suss out who's going to do the work? And this is a topic, right? First, just talk about the work and run to the fire and roll up their sleeves. And by the way, I think roll up the sleeves might be the title of this episode.
Let's have a bite.
That's great. Oh,
I don't know. There's only so much you can do, as you're getting something to bring in an organization. But some of the things that we've learned over time to maybe dig in a little bit deeper on is drilling down to specific examples. I've even asked people for work product before, just to get a sense of, if you said you did something, what exactly did you do? What was your role with that? And to be really specific. Sometimes if you're talking to someone and they're only talking about generalities, or they're mentioning, a huge cadre of vendors because they come from a big pharma, that's sometimes a marker. But, it's really hard. It's more art and probably science.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you touched on it. I'll just echo it a little bit. Some of those very practical things, so like, tell me the last time you solved a problem and how did you solve it? Because people that solve problems can give you the details. I'll give you two quick ones on Connie. Again, we had a problem with CMC. What'd you do? You got down on a plane, you met with the customer, you were there for a week trying to get things done. One other problem, a little personal HIPAA issue. My back went out about a year and a half ago. and we had to sign a document and get it off the, we were sent the terminating agreement. Connie, what does she do? She shows up at my house. I'm bellying on the floor, signing the things. I couldn't get up. I literally couldn't get up. And she ran into the post office. So in describing, like, when was the last time you solved the problem? How'd you do it? Those are like two very practical examples that someone's that just leave their title and get the work done. And that's the kind of can-do examples you really try to find. But it is hard, James, because it's hard. It's probably the hardest thing. The functional experts you can kind of grab, but when you're really scaling for senior leaders, it's really hard to get those.
Yeah, I think people can tend to idealize the life at a startup, right? And we're going to be all doing this, but we have also seen that, the mark of a good team is the willingness to do the work and jump on a flight. And, we had somebody leave a long planned family vacation because there was a serious emergency, and they left their family in Rome and hopped on a plane. So, I think we can idealize for this audience, right? There's real sacrifice there in making these things come to fruition, right? And a lot of it's just very practical and pragmatic, and to use your phrase, running to the fire and just doing those sorts of things. So, I guess for the audience, again, just to underscore, like, yes, it's great to be at a startup. You're creating something, you're working in a high-paced, intense environment, but there's also a great deal of sacrifice that's expected and to make it work. And then how do you impart that then to younger team members, right? And how do you parse out those that are just talking versus doing the work? Particularly the younger team in the mentorship level, putting aside the senior leadership for a moment.
Yeah. Well, I don't want any of the most recent examples that we talked about to dampen the fact that we're also very into leadership development. So the other people, we're now micromanaging and doing all of the tactics ourselves. We're definitely making sure there's learning opportunities across the team. I think that's really, really important for people to see that they can actually, contribute to solving the problems and being able to, do those types of things firsthand and learning from them. I mean, that's a really important thing. What'd you say?
Well, I'd add too, just we try to kind of train and coach that way, but also think modeling away. I think the team sees Connie, other leaders around, doing the work, picking up the ball, doing those things. And that's really helpful for people to see. I mean, James, it gets very practical too. You show up in a conference room. Who's going to plug in the computer and get it going? Like, none of us are above that. We just do it. Like, who made the slide? Oh, I think I did this time. Let's bring it up. It's like, those are like super practical things that I think the team sees that, hey, we're all in this to do some of the mundane, practical, day-to-day things that get it going. And I think that example is important. But we also, and again, Connie leaks this for us, it's just our general performance management cadence. Setting objectives for the company, setting objectives for the team. How do we do an individual? How do we do mid-year view, year-on review? So when things maybe are not going as planned, or an individual it's maybe off the rails on a couple of products, we put it on the table and talk about it. So, all right, but it seems like we're missing something. How can we help or support? And or also at times when you feel like, boy, is this too much we're asking of this individual? But maybe we got to divvy up the work, or maybe it's just not a good fit and we got to handle those things.
One other aspect, James, to your question about, mentoring or coaching younger employees, I think one thing that David and I are both very mindful of is how much capacity people have to bring to the job. There is sacrifice, but there has to also be limits. One phrase that you like to say a lot is there's a lot of life happening, and there's a lot more life happening for maybe somebody who just had their second child and are kind of moving up the ranks versus, look, David and I, we have a lot more free time with our kids having left the house, and we do both have spouses that we have to do some care and feeding, but we have a little more time. But all joking aside, we have to also, it was a human element to this. And so we have to be mindful that, different people are in different places. And so we have to think about capacity, and the whole package, not just what's happening at ONL.
Yeah, I'll echo that again. Back to maybe a comment earlier that I made, but also just this issue here with people have a variety of set of life experiences they're bringing to the table, right? But we have a hard charging team and you get after it, but every one of them to a T. Connie included, me, sir, laying it up there, said you have those emotional moments where, you know what, I'm a bit flooded right now, and maybe it's tears or angst, and you got to be human enough to just embrace that moment and say, yeah, I get it. What can we, how can we help alleviate this issue? Or take the day, go handle what you got to handle. We have somebody else to pick it up. Because that's the human side of the exchange, that whether it's C-suite leaders or individuals, this is a high tension environment. And we as leaders got to be really mindful of that, at the end of the day, it is a company, it's an important direction, but people's kind of lives there's a lot churning, and we try to really do the best we can to be sensitive to that. And that means plugging into being connected to people, and then adjust course and find somebody else who may be able to take on a little bit more to alleviate something. And it's just kind of it's the practical human side, how to make all this stuff work.
Couldn't have said it any better, but it relates back to two of the topics that you kicked off with, right? Being vulnerable and creating a space to do that, and then to build trust through that vulnerability. And it sounds like that, you as a team, you have done a great job in creating an environment across the board for the company. And so employees can feel, safe enough to be vulnerable and then build trust through that, right? And I think that's the mark of any organization, any good organization, right? I'm creating a good culture. So
James, the only thing is, James, nobody can criticize my diet or say I'm getting a little pudgy from time to time. They can't do that. That's the only other vulnerability we don't touch too much.
That's the third rail of ONL. Yeah, bossing out that. That's it.
Nobody says that.
I'm picturing now in the hallways your value statements, and I did that. Yeah, I don't know. David's fitness level, the biggest. That's right. So, talking about building that culture, we're having a great conversation, but we're getting a little lower on time, and I want to make sure that we talk about some of the challenges of scaling, because so many organizations fall down there, and you guys, having raised your most recent large round to execute on a much larger study, you're going through some of those challenges now with a lot of promise, hopefully at the end of it. So I just wanted to open this up and give you both the opportunity to talk about some lessons learned scaling, some advice you'd provide to others, what that looks like going from, ONL 5 years ago to ONL today, and thinking through, well, okay, if we are successful, then what comes next? Because it's not just scaling for today, it's having a forethought to think about what's coming in the future. So just open it up to each of you to kind of touch on any of those as you see fit.
The jumping in load.
No, you can start with those. Yeah.
I was going to say, maybe the approach says we do try to be very methodical on bringing full-time people onto the team. Sometimes you see these big raises or capital raises go out, all of a sudden, teams just blowing up in numbers. And we've really tried to be methodical about leveraging consultants, eventually, pulling people in. So I think that of just being a little bit measured on it, but it does create a bit of healthy tension in the discussion we had before, where people can be kind of running red hot because we don't have perhaps enough bodies at the time. We've probably erred on the side of running hot for a little bit and then bringing somebody in to try to just manage that scalability without getting too big too fast. But it's a tough one. Which one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking probably this along the same lines is trying to maintain flexibility even as you're scaling. So, you hate to say minimally viable, but if we have these goals to accomplish, how can we get to the execution of those goals without over leveraging or getting a little bit too far past our skis, to use another metaphor. So we try to be really careful about that balance. By the same token, I think we also, in the whole scaling process, we try to, obviously we have to keep our eye on the budget and our key performance indicators and all of those things. But I think we also try to think about the softer side. So as we were scaling company, one thing we were very mindful of is we had company values that had been with the company for, 6-7 years. And so now we bring on this new crop of people. How do we engage them? Well, one thing we did was we said, hey, let's take a look at the values again as a new team, as the next team. Do they still work for us? Do we remember them all? How can we add to it so that every new person at the company feels like they contributed a little bit to the mission, vision, and values of the team? And so we rolled out new refreshed team values a few months ago, and we're going to try to put them up along the walls of the company and so on and so forth. So those are the types of things I think we've tried to keep at the forefront, even as we're scaling and even as we're running really high, as David said.
Well, I just maybe add real quick, James, to that point that, and you've probably seen it in your portfolio companies too, and Connie and I have said, over time with companies as they scale, there are times where people may self-select or the management team say, like, you're not ready to go to this next level. I'd much rather be with a team when I was just 4 of us around the table. I'm not ready to go to 15. And, having, again, back to this transparent, open, having that kind of discussion to say, sounds like you'd rather thrive in our super small team again, rather than with a Riccolo again. We just found just being open about that and helping people get to their rightful spot is a helpful part of scaling. Because just because 4 or 5 of us were out table at the beginning and now we're at 16, it just might not be the right fit for everybody. And you're going to have that conversation as part of the scaling as well.
I think that's a great point. Again, it comes back to the building trust and the interpersonal relationships, right? I'm thinking of a very specific example with a company where a junior person was elevated as the company was growing. They weren't excelling, and frankly, we were kind of hesitant, as one is, to bring up the challenges again and again. And it turns out that the person was actually quite relieved to resume their old role. It wasn't a fit for them, but they, because of the company culture, wanted to step up and kind of answer the call, and it worked out for everyone. And, I think that there's a lesson in that, and that you can't be afraid to kind of have those discussions, because the person may be relieved by it and might want a smaller team or something that, isn't necessarily linear or you think about as you're scaling. And Connie, that point about kind of getting buy-in from new hires as you add team members to company culture, hadn't thought of or heard that before. I think you create the culture, you build the foundation, and you want to keep that as you grow. But different, companies at different stages are completely different than they were 5 years ago. So to get that buy-in, I think that's a, very practical step that you can take. So appreciate you sharing that.
I can't underemphasize how important culture is, and that idea of flexibility is more than just headcount and budget. It's your culture has to adapt over time, because what worked for you the first 5 years isn't necessarily going to work for you the next 5 years. It might even be holding you back. Yep. And so it's very humbling to know that just because you were successful last quarter, maybe you got to change things up as a leader, maybe, as a mentor, whatever it is. But it keeps it really interesting.
Never a dull moment, is there? Yeah. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in today's discussion. Any other items, parting shots you'd like to share to help further address effective teamwork in your roles and the teams you're leading, advice for other industry partners, people thinking about or going through the startup journey on their own? Connie, you want to take the lead?
No, I mean, if I was to summarize some of the things from this conversation, don't be afraid of repeating yourself. Repetition is the mother of all knowledge, and that goes for corporate culture and alignment as well. And so I would say consistency. It's okay to kind of go back to the basics.
Yeah, I would just add that, this is a lonely journey, even though we're kind of partners. This is still a long slog. So, James, even within your companies or other listening, Connie and I are always filling our calendars with just some one-on-one chats with both folks who are in the journey, just trying to figure it out. So we throw that out to the team, anybody wants to reach out and chat about these things. We're glad to do it because it's we're all in this innovation gate. We're all believers in this is the right way to kind of build businesses and drive innovation and lead innovation. We're all in to kind of help others if they kind of figure out they're in a jam as well.
It's very generous, and I think representative of kind of the ethos and what you both bring to the ecosystem. I had a call with a startup company yesterday. We're not going to invest. We're probably years away from even making that decision, but much like you, we try to have those conversations and be resources. So for those out there listening, don't hesitate to reach out because you might assume that others are busy or don't want to provide feedback. I have found that with each of you and in the broader community, it's generally very generous in wanting to kind of provide some feedback because it is a lonely journey, particularly, the earlier you get, the lonelier it can be. And then hopefully you build the team and it comes together as it has with ONL. So thank you both. You've shared a ton of insight that I think others will benefit and learn from. Connie and David, thank you for taking the time to have the discussion today.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Have a good one.
You too.